I care about, yes, certainly their future and how they grow up, but also then for all the girls out there that don't have those same opportunities, how do we level the playing field for all of them, whether those are our coaches, whether those are the kids that our coaches coach? That to me, I think is really important, particularly in recognizing that in a lot of parts of the country, in a lot of parts of the world, girls just don't have those same opportunities that boys do.
The author Anais Nin once said, "It's a sign of great inner insecurity to be hostile to the unfamiliar, unwilling to explore the unfamiliar." How do we create more spaces that bridge the division between academics and blue-collar workers, between artists and savvy investors, between those that have and those that have not? The invisible and obvious social barriers between us might cause us to believe that the world is more exclusive, discriminating, and unequal than it might be. But just as easy as believing that the world is extremely divided, we sometimes forget that there are spaces in our society that do and strive to provide a level playing field for all. One of these spaces in our communities that helps mind the gap is the nonprofit sector.
So I think there are some great examples of female leaders that allow us to see that you can be both strong and human as a leader. And for women, it's not about hiding all of those qualities that we bring. It's about turning them up and ensuring that the people around us understand the value.
Our next guest, Pam Baker, is dedicated to empowering, encouraging, and developing more young women to become examples of leadership rather than the exception, through coaching youth sports and giving back to the community. With her own unique leadership, she founded the Women's Coaching Alliance, inspired and built upon the memory of her late husband, Doug Friedman, who made his transition in 2020. Her aim for great leadership and work ethic brought her to places like Genentech and Johnson & Johnson, where she worked as district sales manager, project director, as well as vice president and CEO for several startups in the healthcare and investment sectors. She is a woman dedicated to minding the gap, a British expression she likes to use that shows her willingness to explore the unfamiliar and help light the way for everyone, especially women and future leaders of the world. In a time where the new standard is challenging and questioning the social norms, being attuned to and recognizing the shifts in the baseline of the world and communities around us, we hope that this conversation has something to offer to help bring more and more people together. So please enjoy this conversation with Pam Baker, founder of the Women's Coaching Alliance.
Yeah, so the Women's Coaching Alliance is focused on bringing more women into coaching youth sports with the goal of connecting them with coaching opportunities, but also mentorship and development, so that as they gain the experience of coaching, they also recognize the leadership skills that they're learning in the process. And ultimately, we hope to do a few things. One is have more kids see women as leaders and role models early on, so that is the expectation as opposed to something that is unique. Also, give more kids the chance to play. One of the things that I was surprised by in Burlingame is that we routinely have to turn kids away from playing sports because we just don't have enough coaches. And that's not something that is unique to our community, certainly. And also then to give these young women the experience of working with mentors and being supported by mentors. There's lots of information out in the business world, and that's my background, around this sense of, in order for women to put ourselves out there for being appropriate for a role or a new position or a promotion, we generally feel like we need to have done about 95% of the job first. And often we feel as though we need to figure it all out on our own. And the experience of working with mentors and recognizing that there is this amazing support that can help us be our best, I think is an important early learning opportunity. And also gaining some of the language around the fact that they are developing leadership skills and having tangible examples of leadership through their coaching venue. So
Nice.
we're trying to accomplish a few things, but I think early days we're getting some really positive feedback.
Right. And it sounds like, that's kind of the intention that I wanted to set for this conversation. Um, both you and I have spoken briefly before this and kind of touched upon how you and I probably might have never met if it weren't for this podcasting
Right.
thing, and how different our worlds are. And in a way, we're both kind of here because we're trying to explore something unfamiliar in each of us, right? And I know you're trying to awaken a lot of leadership qualities in women that might be unfamiliar to the current social landscape, but also using sports, which allows people to explore a lot of things about themselves that they might not know about themselves. Unfamiliar. So I'm hoping that's the unspoken undercurrent that we can carry with us throughout from the beginning to the end of this conversation. Hopefully, if all goes
I
well.
think that's a great point, John, because I
Yeah.
think one of the things about leadership is that often you don't really know what you have within you until
Mm.
you get a chance to try some things out.
Hmm.
And so that idea of tapping into something that is there, but maybe we're not aware of is awfully powerful.
Right, right. And you mentioned, I did a little digging. You mentioned Mind the Gap, which was something new to I mean, you hear it all the time, but you never really know what the origins are. And, it's the British expression for kind of like using the subway, right? And
Right.
minding the gap between. So hopefully, yes, we'll unplug some of those things throughout this conversation. But I
Great.
would like to start in the beginning. I know you mentioned previously that your father worked in Wall Street.
Yes.
Can you talk about or describe what it was like growing up in that kind of, with a dad in that growing up in that environment?
Yeah, so he worked on Wall Street his entire career. I grew up in northern New Jersey, and he and my mom, both parents, were very focused on working hard, sort of, working your way up the ladder, as it were. He was also somebody who worked with lots of different people in his role. So he had to understand who he was interacting with, how to connect with them most effectively, how to flex his style. So, as
Hmm.
somebody on Wall Street, he obviously had lots of numbers and data at his fingertips. And for some people, that was really important. And for other people, they didn't want to get to any of the numbers either at all or until they had created that personal connection.
Hmm.
So I think for him, understanding his own preferences may or may not be the best fit for the person in front of him
Hmm.
was an important learning early on.
Mm.
Um, and it was an environment in our home that we were really aware of being fiscally responsible and not wasting money. We didn't have a lot of extra money. We weren't
Hmm.
poor, but we were very careful, and that was a lesson that I always took away
Hmm.
is financial good fiscal awareness and management. But I think
Wow.
both my parents taught me lots of good leadership, career lessons along the way, partly by saying some things, but also partly by modeling.
Right, right. And you said your mom was also part of that type of business.
She
Um,
was actually a teacher. She was a learning disabilities consultant.
oh
And so
wow.
she started her career working as a teacher, I think in fourth grade, and then navigated to working with kids with some learning differences. And at that point in time, it was I think it was not nearly as well recognized in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
prevalence of kids with learning differences. They called it learning disabilities at that point. And so, again, appreciating everybody's differences, and that just because they read differently, they learn differently, they take in information differently, doesn't make them any less than all the
Mm-hmm.
rest of us, but recognizing how to adapt and flex the learning approach was, I think, the way that she often was most effective. And that was also about really getting to know the person in front of you and how to easily connect with them.
Wow. And so it sounds like you got a like kind of like the best of both worlds, like a holistic versus the Wall Street that people have in their minds as far as like how movies portray people from Wall Street is, very flashy. It's like a very flashy lifestyle. So it sounds like you had a much different viewpoint from actually being the daughter of somebody who's worked in these two different worlds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I never thought about that, John, but I think you're right. It was definitely not a Leo DiCaprio household. So,
Yeah, that's right. That's cool. That's
or
really
Michael
cool.
Douglas for that matter. So,
Right, right,
not at
right.
all.
So much of your work now involves women and empowerment and empowering women to be leaders. What was your idea of womanhood and leadership early on in your life?
So my mom was a great role model. She worked outside the home. It wasn't uncommon, but it wasn't common either. And so the experience of coming home and not having my mom there was okay. That was just the way our family worked. And also the experience of watching my parents really share the workload. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that my mom did all of certain household chores. She certainly did more of them than my dad did, but they also were intentional about sharing that workload. And I think the belief, both my parents put a big premium on education. And so
Mm,
the belief from both of them that you can really be whatever you want to be, and education is an important foundation to be able to do that. So that was an early expectation that was set. I have an older sister, so it was three females and one male.
uh-huh.
So there was absolutely the expectation that women were no less than men. And my
Right.
dad absolutely supported that. He supported all of my mom's career interests and aspirations. She went back for a master's degree when she was, I think, in her early 40s, and he was super supportive of that. So that was
Wow.
the experience and environment that I grew up in.
Wow. I'm already hearing like, examples of the perfect recipe for what you're doing right now. So,
Well,
and
it's
I'll,
the recipe. I'm not sure if it's the perfect one, but it's
right,
the
right.
recipe.
Um, so you've created I've seen that you've created a track record of leadership throughout all the places that you worked, Genentech, principal with a couple of high profile firms. And one that stood out was, one of America's oldest corporations in Johnson and Johnson. So I imagine that you've had to really work your way through those places. What are your thoughts about how success is achieved from your standpoint? And can you talk about some of the obstacles you've had to face while in those leadership positions?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think my second boss when I was working at Johnson and Johnson said to me, success is based on three things: luck, sponsorship, and timing. And I remember hearing that and thinking, oh, no, 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 no,
Mm,
no. It's based
right,
on hard work. It's based
right.
on the grind. And I have to tell you, a few decades later, I look back on that and I think he was absolutely right. A
Mm,
little bit of luck goes a long way. Sponsorship, making sure that you've got really good people behind you, makes a huge difference just in terms of doors that are opened, connections that are created. It doesn't mean it gets you the job, but it does mean that you walk in with some greater familiarity and some some credibility, quite frankly,
Mm-hmm.
into the interviewer person that you're meeting. And timing. Timing goes a long way. I had opportunities throughout the course of my career just because I happened to be talking to certain people that had an opportunity, be living in certain places, having certain experiences that were relevant. And so I think that is a huge descriptor and way to think about success. So I think there are lots of schools out there that might say, no, it's about getting a certain GPA. And that's important. But I do think luck, sponsorship, and timing really capture it awfully well.
What was like some of the biggest take? Because those are fairly, when people think of corporations like Johnson and Johnson, it's fairly old corporation, right? And so,
Absolutely.
did you have a feeling that they were doing things very old school? Did you feel like, did you feel that sense of, I have to work a little bit harder because I am a woman, or did you feel nurtured in your role there?
I would say a little bit of both. I do think that there was a sense of I wanted to work a little bit harder to stand out among the men. I mean, there were lots of white men that I worked with. I didn't ever feel as though I was held back because of that, but I did feel a sense of wanting to work harder to be able to make sure that I was seen and valued. And yes, there were times that I felt as though, wow, this is really process heavy, or this is taking way longer than it should. And so I started my career at Johnson & Johnson, then went to Genentech. And after Genentech, went to a couple of startups. And that was the time where, after having been in some big companies and thought, oh my gosh, this process is taking far too long and drawn out, then I went to the startup world that didn't have any process. And suddenly I thought, oh, wait, now I understand why the process exists, because there's no protocol for decision making or getting certain priorities accomplished. It was the wild, wild west. And so I learned to appreciate the both. I appreciated having some and enough process, but I also appreciated being nimble enough to be able to adapt. So I felt like I saw both sides of the spectrum and finally could value both of them.
And in your roles during those instances at Johnson and Johnson and all the places that you were a leader at, were you able to operate creatively, or did you have to operate within the context of those places?
Yes.
Yeah,
Again,
both.
a little bit of both. Yeah. So when I was at J&J, I was put together with two other colleagues, and we had to relaunch a product that had been launched by another company. So J&J was purchasing the product, and we had to do all of the launch planning in secret. And
Wow.
so because it hadn't been announced to the street and all sorts of things. So that gave us lots of creativity, because we were told, here, you need to relaunch this product. You need to do it in 10 weeks, which, for context, usually it takes roughly 18 months to 2 years to launch a product. And you need to do it without telling colleagues or vendors what it is that you're doing. So there was a lot of, okay, here's our best guess. We're going to take this approach. And we didn't have an opportunity to run things by people. So that led to lots of creativity. I would say that wasn't the norm when I was at J&J or at Genentech, because, again, process exists for reasons and liability, especially when you're in healthcare. So there are certain sectors where I felt like I had some creativity, but they were probably more limited than they were the norm.
I see. And also, when I look at these places, I would assume that most people would just be okay with staying at these places and retiring. Right? So, what was the motivation for you to venture out and eventually go to startups and then start something out on your own?
Yeah, I had lots of folks after I left Genentech who said, "Oh, I don't know if I want to stay here, but I'm so scared to leave." And the motivation for me was I went through a performance review with my boss,
Mm-hmm.
and he asked me what I wanted to do next. And I had looked at all different groups within the company, and he suggested a few. And I remember thinking, there's nothing else I want to do here. And it
Mm.
wasn't because I had a bad experience. I learned a lot, think very highly of the company, really liked the people that I worked with. But I realized that there was just nothing that felt like I was going to grow from. So that was a good catalyst for me to say, okay, if I don't think I'm going to grow here, then I think it's time for me to move on. And
Mm.
I've done that a few times in my career. And in the moment, I remember thinking to myself, this is such a stupid idea. I am well regarded. I have a good job. I like the people I work with. I have no idea why I am feeling some compulsion to leave and try something totally new where I don't know if I'm going to succeed, where I won't know the people, they won't know me. And I remember talking to my mom at one point, and I said, "Yeah, I'm feeling super pulled and tugged. I think it's just a stupid idea, and I have no idea why I want to leave." And she said to me, "But you've always been like that. When you were a kid, you would get bored with stuff really easily. You
Mm-hmm.
had to move on to the next thing." And that was a really big light bulb for me of, oh, it's just that's just part of who I am. And I feel like if I'm not learning something and doing something different, I get bored very easily. And from the outside, it looks like, oh my gosh, that's a great setup.
Mm-hmm.
And I often try to convince myself this is a great setup, and I
Mm-hmm.
never succeed. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I tend to
So,
run on to the next.
so ultimately, what type of growth are you looking for personally when you're, moving at the time, when when you can go back and see that you're moving from place to place, and it seems like you've outgrown them, right?
Yeah.
Um, is it, yeah? What type of challenges do you think you were, I guess, trying to put yourself in front in, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's shifted over the years. So
Mm,
early on, it was about proving that I could work at more senior levels, get a greater degree of respect, expand my skill set and knowledge. But over the last few years, I would say it's really shifted to less about me and more about the impact
mm,
that I'm having.
mm-hmm,
And that was the genesis to create certainly the Women's Coaching Alliance.
mm-hmm,
And I feel like perhaps I have some experiences and skills to add, but what I really care about is that we get more great young women out there with the skills and the competence to lead.
mm-hmm,
And so that, I think, is it's really now it's about impact. Wherever I can have impact that makes a difference,
mm-hmm,
that's really what I care about.
mm-hmm. So the push to start the Women's Coaching Alliance, was it a hell yeah at first, or was it just kind of
Gosh, no.
should I not? Yeah.
No, it was
Yeah.
it was none of those. I didn't want to do this.
Yeah, it's a nonprofit, right?
Right.
Something
And
totally. Mhm,
I didn't have any experience with nonprofits. I'd never
mhm,
worked in one. I'd never, been on a board for one. I had no experience at all. And
mhm,
so the backstory is, so my husband in 2020 got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in May, and he passed away about a little less than 3 months later. And so there was a sort of, what do we do to kind of keep who he was alive? So we worked with our Parks and Rec Foundation to set up a fund to make sure two goals. One was so that every kid had a chance to play sports and that they get a great coach when they do. He was somebody for whom sports was really the place where he built his confidence. So that was a big piece of who he was. And as we set that up, I thought, well, I have no idea we can figure out the providing scholarships for kids to play, but the coaching piece was, I had no idea. I'd never been a coach. That was my husband's job.
Wow.
And so as I learned more about what the opportunity and what the need was in terms of more great coaches, I recognized that women had a really important role to play. And that was true to who he was. He was somebody who pulled women off the sidelines to help him coach, because he was coaching our daughters and he didn't know the girls' experience. And so as I thought about this opportunity to build the ranks of women coaches, and ultimately we identified our target of these female athletes, to me, it became clear that it wasn't just about Burlingame residents being coaches. It was about providing the opportunity for more women to lead in any community.
Right.
And so that then became, well, you can't do that with a fund sitting at the Burlingame Parks and Rec. So if you actually want to do that, then you have to take the next step and create an organization that allows you to do that. So I would say I have perhaps, this is probably terrible to admit on a podcast, but I've been a little bit of a reluctant founder. That was not my intent. It was absolutely just to be able to bring this to life in Doug's memory. But then that didn't feel like enough, because what I realized is there's so much need out there.
Wow. Okay. So that was the jump to go big. Seeing that there is a need and honoring your late husband. And first of all, I'm very sorry and my condolences to you. But I also would like to share that, I don't know, for some reason, do you believe in synchronicities or like
Absolutely.
My wife and I have been trying to start a family. I've been married for 12 years now. And I guess, it just, for some reason, having kids was never in our cards. We went through IVF and it never happened. It was just kind of like, hey, unexplained. And then, coming across James at our mutual, your colleague, or how do you say it?
Yeah, he's part of my team.
Right, yeah. Right. Somebody who I've never seen since high school, which was over 20 years ago. I end up seeing him and he's like, hey, I'm part of the Women's Coaching Alliance. We're trying to find somebody to, get the owner on the podcast or whatever. And I can probably edit this out later or whatever. But before that, the weeks prior, I just found out naturally that we were expecting a child.
Congratulations!
Yeah. And
my gosh!
Yeah. And since you and I talked, I found out that the child will be a girl.
Oh, that is awesome! Congratulations!
So, yeah. Thank you so much. And totally besides, I wasn't expecting to go there, but
that is great news.
Yeah. I would love to, ask you more about Doug, if that's somebody that you're willing to share about, because, I really feel that I really appreciate what you're starting out to do with this foundation. And that was what kind of the question in my mind was, why not just just start small and maybe like some parks and rec, like exactly what you did, right? Just the parks and rec, but you're going big. And I've seen that there's some in other cities, right?
Not yet. So that is a good point. We've been really intentional. We just, as I say, we launched last year, and we're very focused on, let's get our model tight. Let's figure out how to make our model work in any community. And so that's our focus over the next year, so that we can export it to other communities and feel confident that we have addressed most of the challenges that are likely to come along. So I don't want to send this to another community when it's not ready and we haven't worked out all the kinks. So that's our focus right now.
Nice. And I'd like to go back to, you mentioned you're kind of a reluctant business starter as far as this nonprofit goes. And as, somebody who's accomplished what you've accomplished in your career, are there any fears that you're still, or insecurities that you're still talking through in your mind? Does that even go on
Totally.
in your mind? Yeah. And what is it
Totally.
like? What's the pep talk you give yourself?
So I don't have much of a pep talk, but I have someone I know who I thought described it really well. She had a podcast episode and she talked about, are you committed or are you interested?
Mm,
And the way she described the difference was, when you're committed to something, you will push through and just figure it out. When you're interested in something, it's something that may dip your toe in. When other things come along, it'll move to the back burner. And that was helpful for me to say, I'm committed to this. And there are so many things I don't know. I mean, I just had to put together a role description for our board of directors. I've never done that before. And so I reached out to a bunch of people I knew, put something together, sent it out for advice, got some good feedback. So there are all sorts of things that I'm running into that I have no idea how to do, and nor do I intend to learn them. But I have decided that what I bring to this is I'm a collector of good people. And
mm-hmm.
so there are lots of good people out there. And so I see my role as helping the folks around me understand the vision and then giving them the space and latitude to do what they do really well,
Mm-hmm.
with enough connections along the way to make sure that they feel supported, they have the right guidance, and that I'm super honest about, I don't know. Like, that's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Let's figure it out. And there are lots of those.
Right.
So I don't have a particular pep talk beyond, this is important and I've got to figure it out to move forward. So just dive in and give it your best shot.
Yeah. Did it take you a while to learn that, or is that something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Something more.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a good friend I often see for a walk, and I said to her, I just don't know how to do this. And she said, that's okay. You're going to figure it out. And so she keeps coming back to that with me. I'm like, but I don't know how to do this. She said, but you figured out the last three, so you'll figure this one out too.
That's awesome.
And just that experience of saying, yep, I did figure out the last thing. Now it looks really easy and obvious, but it was really hard at first. And knowing that transition has happened, and so I can do that again, has been really helpful.
Nice. And I love that you're focused on the sports aspect of, bringing people together, which brings people from all walks of life, different parts of the world, social status. I mean, it doesn't matter on the playing field. It's like, the work you put in is the work that you're going to see succeed. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Truly leveling the playing field.
Yeah. And are you a competitor in any sport?
No, I was terrible at all sports, which is sort of the joke of why I'm doing this. I played rec soccer when I was a kid, but not well. I'm convinced the only reason they kept me on the team is because my dad was the line judge on the side. My parents played tennis, so they would get me out to play tennis, but I didn't do that very well either. So no, I'm a lousy example of an athlete. So that said, I have found that staying active in any number of ways is really important to my own sense of sort of mental well-being. When I miss a workout or I'm too sedentary for too long, I can really feel it in my head. Things just get scrambled. So it's really important to me to be active, but I am absolutely not an athlete.
I guess I'm just asking because I want to know, you're totally sold on the coaching aspect of developing leadership, right?
Yeah.
But Well, yeah. What do you see about coaching? I mean, some of it is really obvious, but how do you see it translating, I guess, into the real world?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In so many different ways. And so this was the aha for me. So last year, my daughter was playing basketball and they needed some more coaches. So I said, I will assistant coach because I don't know anything about basketball. So I went out and learned the girls' names and, threw balls around and all that kind of stuff. And so that gave me a chance to watch what coaches do. And what I realized from there, and actually in early conversations with young women that we were interviewing about the idea of coaching, what I heard from them was often, so what gets in the way of coaching? Well, I don't really want to deal with difficult parents. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's a challenge. And as I sat with it, what I realized is that's an important leadership skill, though. That's just navigating conflict and influencing without authority. And so, boy, if I had learned how to navigate conflict when I was 17 or 18 years old, I would have been so much further ahead from where I was when I ultimately moved into my career. And there are lots of other examples. So coaches have to pull teams together after a difficult loss, just like leaders have to bring their team back together when there's a new competitor on the market or sales miss the mark or there's an unexpected downturn that affects their industry or their business or what they do. And so it's the same skill just delivered differently. There is the need to navigate uncertainty. The coach doesn't know how the other team is going to show up and their game plan, just like a leader doesn't always know what's going to come along that day or how the competitor is going to enter the market. And so those are the same skills. It's the ability to understand what makes each of your team members tick on the field. We were talking with a couple of our coaches who are coaching 7-year-olds in soccer, and they were talking about the dynamics between the different kids. Well, leaders do the exact same thing. They understand who's on their team and what makes them tick, what motivates them, what do they bring to the team? How do I bring all of these folks together so that you have that 1 and 1 equals 3? So those are just a few of the examples, but it's been fascinating to watch what coaches do and see just how beautifully tied those skills are to what leaders do. And I had the experience working at some big companies where we would bring in these motivational speakers. And in many cases, they're coaches. Listening to what somebody like Steve Kerr talks about when he gets mic'd and talks about to his players. He's a great leader. He's a great coach, but he knows how to connect with and motivate Steph. And that's different than how he connects with and motivates Draymond and so on. So there are so many, many parallels. And our goal through the Women's Coaching Alliance is to help make those visible to these young women so they recognize they are getting great leadership experience through coaching.
Yeah, you mentioned you're not a competitor, but it seems like you're very observant as far as how coaches, through your experience, navigate their leadership roles. Are you a fan of any sports at all? Do you watch sports consistently?
I do. I love watching sports. I joke that I don't know how to play basketball. Like, I don't know anything about basketball. I like watching basketball. Right. I like watching football. I'm a tennis fan. Those are probably my big 3, I would say. So yeah, I definitely enjoy spectating, as they say.
That's awesome. It's just because, I think sometimes people lose that, I guess when they're watching sports, all they see is just people running around, trying to put a ball into a hoop or cross some, line or whatever. But I love that you're very aware of the development processes that go through individuals by being a part of a team, or whether it's through coaching. Yeah, it is. It really is a beautiful thing, and I don't know. I know it's helped me develop. Myself. I've never been a high school or collegiate competitor, but something that I do on my free time. But
Yeah.
just also curious, wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on women's roles in combat sports?
I haven't thought about that one, John.
Yeah.
I so I really haven't thought about it. At the same time, I would say, why not?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I think when it's up to us in making the decision about, do we want to or do we not want to, I don't see why it shouldn't be left to both men and women. My
Mm-hmm.
daughter came home, so my twins just started high school last month, and one of them came home and said, well, this coach, whose name I didn't recognize, asked me if I wanted to join the wrestling team. Now,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
okay, think about it. So what I do is I'm working on this Women's Coaching Alliance. I am all about advocating for women as leaders and equal opportunity. And my first reaction, I'm embarrassed to say this, but my first reaction was, wait, isn't that a boys' sport? And thankfully, I did not say that. That stayed in my little thought bubble, but that was my first reaction. And as soon as I thought it, I thought, "Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed to actually have thought that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a terrible thing." But my hope is that the more women have those opportunities, then the more the younger girls see that and say, "Oh, I see it, and I can be it."
Mm.
Um, I also wanted to just share one, talking about a little bit about sports and coaching. I did have an experience when I was assistant coaching my daughter's basketball team
Mm-hmm.
that really reinforced the power of coaching. So this was in January of 2021. So we were, sorry, January of 2022. So
Mm-hmm.
we were in the midst of COVID still.
Mm-hmm.
And there was lots of concern about, if you don't feel well, don't come to the games or practices. And that was the expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And so our team, we ended up with four girls who showed up for the game. The other team had seven girls.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, not knowing the sport, my co-coach said to me, well, that coach has the opportunity to either play five against our four,
Mm-hmm.
or he can drop one and play 4-on-4, or he can give us one of his players.
Right.
And I thought, okay, we're coaching middle school rec level sports in the middle of a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he's not going to play five to R4.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he played five to R4.
Whoa. Okay.
And I thought, what a terrible leadership lesson. He just sent all of these girls, the girls on our team and the girls on his team, that what mattered more than anything, more than the health of kids, more than keeping the competition even, was winning. And
Mm-hmm.
that was such a powerful lesson for me, that the 11 girls in that gym took that message away. And I thought, I want to change that. That's not okay. That is not the message that we want our girls to hear.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, you just brought some memories that I just recently had the privilege of coaching. I have no experience coaching seventh grade boys, but I used to be a chef for a private school, and
Wow.
throughout the pandemic, it's this Waldorf school that's a startup in San Francisco. They're on their 10th year.
Yeah.
And they asked, it was like, do you want to coach basketball, because we can't serve food anymore because everybody's, masked up,
Mm.
and that the the number one thing, I had the privilege to work with a more experienced coach, and he said, it's not the kids that you have to worry about, it's the parents. Right. So the conflict management and things like that. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's such a very important part of, I guess, just personal development in general that is not discussed enough, especially in schools, or um, it's never been taught to me while I was in school. Unless,
No,
yeah.
I think it often isn't.
Hmm.
And that to me is the power of mentors who have been there. I have navigated lots of conflict and I've had to do a lot of influencing without authority throughout the course of my career.
Hmm.
So I have some ideas and recommendations along those lines, but I didn't 30 years ago.
Hmm.
And so, and there are lots of people with that kind of experience. And so I look at that and say, let's tap into that. Let's give these young women the benefit of that
Hmm.
experience so they're not having to learn every lesson on their own.
Mm. I saw, and I made note on reading the foundation's website, and I guess I'll just read it off here. More young women will emerge with the foundational skills, confidence, and support to lead.
Mhm.
Women's Coaching Alliance prepares young women to be leaders within and outside of sports. When I read that, I was wondering what your personal evolution into being the leader that you are today. Um, if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I would say I have had the experience of both learning by doing and learning by watching and having lots of good mentors, formal and informal, along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I read about leadership and that's helpful, but it's really to me about applying the learning, trying things out and learning what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think, having the humility to recognize that you don't know it all, you can't know it all, and there are lots of useful resources outside of you. So, yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes now people talk about career paths as jungle gyms as opposed to ladders. And I like that
Mm-hmm.
visual. And I think that's been true for me as well. So different roles and sort of moving across, moving up, sometimes moving down,
Yeah.
taking different steps in and out. And I would say that's probably been true about my leadership as well. I've gotten to a point a number of times in my career where I felt like, okay, I've got this. I'm feeling confident. I'm leading. I know what I'm doing. And then I'll get tapped or I'll ask to do something with different kinds of responsibilities. And then some of those foundational pieces feel like they fall away because I'm not a content expert any longer.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've come to learn is that those foundations still remain. It's thinking about how to tap into each of those based on the work that I'm doing to be most impactful and most useful.
I love what you mentioned earlier about, I think you were listing off the great qualities of good leaders. And a lot of them is about knowing your personnel. And
Absolutely.
a lot of coaches that I've had throughout my whole life, whether we're just really tough guy, just like, beating, beating whatever it is into until you learn something, right? But then you start studying great coaches, great business leaders, and you'll see that there is kind of like a nurturing quality about them. Maybe not over nurturing, but just being able to level with the people that you are leading, like a servant style leader where you're not beyond the people that you're guiding in a certain direction, I guess, is what I got
Yeah,
from what you
one of my
said.
favorite expressions also that I learned from somebody I worked for is people don't know how much people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Mm.
I think that is spot on.
Hmm.
That you can wow them with data and numbers, but until people really know that you care,
Hmm.
do you know anything about me? What is it about me that we connect on? My husband had so he was a big advocate of great coaches along the way. And every time he would think about taking a new job and interview with somebody, he would always go through Lou Holtz's 3 questions about, do I want you on my team? And they were, can I trust you? Do you care about me? And are you committed
Wow.
to excellence? And every time we would sit down and he'd say, oh, I met with so-and-so, and we'd sit in front of the fireplace, and he'd say, well, I think they're committed to excellence, but I don't know. I don't know if I trust them. And it was really interesting just to watch it evolve, but that was a constant for him. And I think it's a good set of 3 that go beyond speaking to the skills. It's about, do you care about me as a person, and do I feel like you will have my best interests in mind?
Wow, I love that. I've never heard those 3 questions, but it makes sense. I mean, when I think about all the chefs that I've worked for, all the coaches that I've had, it's great. Yeah. Your husband was he a coach before having daughters?
Not before having daughters, although I remember on an early date, I asked him what he would have done if he could have done anything for a living. And immediately he said, I would have been a coach.
Wow. Okay.
But he got the
Interesting.
message from his family that wasn't really practical, or wouldn't earn him enough money, or something along those lines. So that was sort of a non-starter for him. So once our girls got old enough to play, he would go out and coach pretty much all of their sports, whether or not he had played them.
You mentioned, and it's on your website, that the organization, the Women's Coaching Alliance, is founded on the memory and the legacy of Doug. You both raised 2 girls, and it's very obvious from the beautiful tribute that you put on the website, that he was very present in their lives.
Very present.
Yeah, yeah. And, I'm just curious, what did having twin girls reinforce about, I guess I would like to ask you first and foremost, your perspective on the world. What did it change or reinforce?
I've never thought about that. What did having twins change about my perspective on the world? I think it is...
Or just girls in general.
It's given me a few perspectives. One, in terms of having twins, is that I believe that they come out largely who they are. That as parents, we have some influence over them, but I can see they're fraternal twins. And even in the case of identical twins, my impression is they are just their own people. They may look a certain way. My girls look different, but they are different human beings. Even though they came into the world at the same time, they are their own people. I think the other piece is, and this might sound contradictory to that, but it's the fact that we as parents have a lot of influence, not just in what we say, but in what we do and how we show up. And I think recognizing that ultimately the world is made up of people who have parents, obviously, that it is a big responsibility of how we raise our kids, the lessons that we send them. And for me, of course, having girls has just, I think, reinforced the importance of making sure that they have every opportunity that every other kid out there has. And my kids are pretty fortunate. They live in a nice place. They have a comfortable home, and not every girl out there has the same opportunities. So I care about, yes, certainly their future and how they grow up, but also then for all the girls out there that don't have those same opportunities, how do we level the playing field for all of them, whether those are our coaches, whether those are the kids that our coaches coach? That to me, I think is really important, particularly in recognizing that in a lot of parts of the country, in a lot of parts of the world, girls just don't have those same opportunities that boys do.
So would you say that this sense of leveling the playing field. I remember you mentioned that your parents kind of went out of their way to understand the differences between people. Would you say that that was instilled in you at a very early age, and that's what still drives you now to make, I can't help but make the connection. Yeah.
It's a great point, John. It's not something that I've often thought about, but yes, I think
Mm,
that they they absolutely did make us aware of what we were fortunate
mm-hmm,
to have and to be, not just sort of tangibly, but my sister and I came from parents who were still married. Lots of our friends had divorced parents.
mm,
Um, so I think, yeah, they were good in creating some awareness of a recognition of others
mm-hmm.
and not just focusing entirely on ourselves and our own world, about how do we do something that helps other people and makes a difference for other people.
Wow.
And I think, the more of that we can create in the world, I think is a really important thing. Part of what I hope is that by bringing these young women into coaching opportunities, not only do they achieve the things that we talked about, of more kids see women as leaders and role models, more kids get a chance to play, more young women develop these leadership skills, but in the process, that more young women understand and feel the value of giving back to their communities, and that they see that that's making a difference for the communities in which they live. And for all of us to make a bit of difference and impact in our own communities, I think would go an incredibly long way.
You're listening to the Quake City Portal podcast with our guest, Pam Baker of the Women's Coaching Alliance. More information posted on the quakecityportal.com. Thank you. Thank you for that. One last question about Doug, your husband.
Yeah.
I'm just curious to know if you saw what kind of changes that you saw in him after having girls, and what are some ideas or examples of how he coached or helped raise your twin girls, if any, that could be passed on to others, especially men, that we can learn from?
Yeah, it's funny. He was a super competitive athlete and he was in sales. And I think part of the reason that sales worked so well for him was because you could always compete on how are you doing? How am I doing? The numbers and all the rest. And yet to watch him coach girls was a very different experience. And he coached softball, basketball. He was a line judge for soccer. And basketball was his sport. That was his happy place. And so softball, he had played a bit in a dad's league, but so he coached their softball team. And I'll never forget, there was this young girl who, I think it was her first season playing, and she would get up at every game and she would never get a hit. And I sat next to her mom a few times in the stands, and her poor mom was she wanted her to get a hit, not because she cared about the hit, but because she wanted her to feel as though she had had some success. And this girl would come to every single practice.
Wow.
She came to every single game. She kept working at it. And at the very last game, she got a hit.
Wow.
And I have no idea if she got on base or not.
Okay.
But her mom was sitting next to me and she said to me, there's no way that she would have kept coming if Doug hadn't made it so fun. And I think that was who he was. It was about making it fun for the kids.
Yeah.
It was not about the score. It was about, are they out there having a good time? Are they out there running around, meeting other kids, being with their friends? And he got so much out of playing sports. And I think he wanted to instill that in every kid. So that was, and he was the same way with our girls. He was funny and silly, and he was the fun guy.
Yeah.
And it was so much fun to be around, just because everything he did, it just, he just made it more fun.
Wow.
So, and that's what he took into coaching.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Pam. That's beautiful. Yeah. Making it fun, and I love the way you juxtapose the competitive sales part in him, and then the hey, let's just go out there and learn together, and that's so beautiful. So yeah, I guess we're almost approaching the end, so I'm just going to ask you a few more questions if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
One of the recurring themes in this podcast is, are you familiar with Pema Chodron?
Yes.
The Buddhist monk. She had this quote that I read recently that I just felt was just like, oh, this is why I do what I'm doing, and why I'd like to meet people like you is, okay, she wrote, only to the extent that we expose ourselves to annihilation can that which is indestructible be found in us. And one of the recurring themes that I like to bring up in this podcast is destigmatizing grief, and embracing darkness as a part of the human experience, because I mentioned, what my wife and I were going through during that time was essentially grief. It was kind of like a letting go of the ideas. Everybody grows up to be a father, right? Or everybody grows up to be parents, but life throws you those curveballs. Nothing is perfect. So if you care to share, and it's okay if you want to skip on to the next question, but what did you learn from what I imagine was just an unfathomably challenging time for you and your family, and what can that hopefully help others learn? What lesson did you learn that can hopefully help others is what I'm.
Yeah, I've learned a lot through the grieving process. One is that you feel the way you feel, and that's okay. And what I have also learned is to try to deny that you feel the way you feel makes it a lot worse and not better. And in many cases, the people around us just want us to feel better. And that comes from a really good place. And we feel the way we feel. And so it's given me great perspective on just navigating grief with other people and not trying to fix it. Even in what we're doing with the Women's Coaching Alliance, I'm just much more aware of entering into conversations with, would you like some ideas, or would you just like me to listen? And either is okay. And I have a tendency to be such a fixer that my automatic inclination is, I want to fix it for you. But there is no fixing grief. And there is, again, I look at the Women's Coaching Alliance and I say that wouldn't have happened if not for Doug's loss. So and I'm not trying to say, oh, things happen for a reason, because I really don't love that expression.
Yeah.
But I think to just acknowledge you are where you are, you feel the way you feel, and sit with that. The feelings aren't going to kill you. They are just vibrations in your body. And the more you accept them and just, they are there and they will not be there forever.
Wow.
Has been a powerful lesson for me. And I think that relates to grief. It relates to difficult times. And just getting comfortable in the discomfort, I think has been a big learning.
Do you have a spiritual practice?
I have gone back and forth. So I have done some meditations. I have done some journaling. I have done some gratitude lists. I have not found one that has stuck for an an extended period of time. So I would say I am playing with my spiritual practice currently.
Right. I totally agree with you when you say, what was it? Things happen for a reason.
Mm,
Well, if there's anything that I've learned throughout this whole time that 16 weeks my wife has been pregnant, it's just things are going to happen whether or not
yeah,
I want it to happen or not. It's just nature is going to do its thing.
yeah,
So
it will.
the more
And it all
you,
makes more sense in the rearview mirror,
Mhm.
right? In retrospect, it really begins to make sense. I don't think I'm at that point yet with Doug, but things do make much more sense in the
Mhm.
rearview mirror. But
Mhm.
yeah, and nature, as you say, nature will do its thing.
Yeah, and it's to expect things to be perfect is like, I don't know. I've been alive long enough to know that it's never perfect but those times where it is, it's just yes, be thankful and
Yeah.
yeah. Well, just to completely make a different turn into a different set of questions. I feel like at this moment, you know, things are shifting. You're starting this venture. Ev- it's not just happening with individuals. I feel like socially things are shifting, and yes, with this organization that you're starting, it's a huge shift in putting leaders, women as leaders, and having people see more women as leaders, even if it's just on a local grassroots level. Um, I mean, there's borders dissolving and being drawn every day. There's emerging virtual worlds,
Yeah.
cultures, countercultures, fads coming and going and coming back again. So, in relation to what you're doing, uh, what do you think is the landscape that you're preparing women for in the future or within the next, I don't know, decade or so?
My hope is that when we look at leadership, that there is not a gender component to it. So that's leaders in politics, that is leaders in community service, that is leaders in business. And I think one of the things I try to really emphasize is that this is not about women displacing men.
Mm-hmm.
If we are training or developing women to succeed in an all-female world, that is not reality, and that's also not that's not a great practice, because men have so much to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can stand side by side with the other women and men around us and learn from each other and collectively bring our ideas and our skills to the table, that's really what I'm going for. So just like I would like for every kid to expect that they are just as likely to have a female coach as a male coach, that all of us, stop celebrating the fact that a woman is elected to Congress or as president or what have you. That is, well, of course she is.
Yeah,
Why
right,
wouldn't she be?
right.
So that's what I'm hoping to have a small piece in influencing.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions that comes up every now and then between my wife and I um, is, what do you think female leaders can do differently from their male counterparts? Because
What do they bring different? Like, what do they do differently in general in leading?
I think so. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What qualities do you see happening? Or
It
Mhm.
was interesting. We had a panel conversation at our launch event, and we had 5 different people on there who have been coaches in the past and now lead in different ways. One in a nonprofit, one in a big company, one runs his own business, one who's been mayor. And so we asked that question of them and
Mhm.
said, what do women bring differently to the table as leaders, and what's missing when they're not there? And what we heard from them were a few things. One is a oftentimes, and this isn't true 100%, but oftentimes a greater awareness of tapping into all the different people at the table, a greater degree of empathy, which I think we've seen again and again over the last couple of years with COVID, has been more and more important. A greater willingness to, or a willingness, I shouldn't say greater, but a willingness to really ask some questions and stay in a curious mode for a period of time. So I think that some of the things that we often think of as the skills of women overall, we see in leadership, and they have really important qualities. Again, I think, I think of empathy, and oftentimes we think, oh, well, that means that she's going to be weak. Not at all. Empathy over the last few years has allowed leaders to say, how do we continue to keep our organizations and our people engaged in a way that allows us to accomplish our objectives? And that's been a key piece of the organizations that have been successful over the last couple of years.
And do you have any favorite stories about women throughout history, fictional, movies, books?
Do I have any favorite stories?
Or mentor, maybe, that you've had?
I'm going to have to think about that one a little bit harder, John. I think there are so many neat women to watch out there. I don't feel as though I have anything that's incredibly personal, but the women who have gone out and said, well, of course I can do this. Of course I can take that role on. I mean, I think like Indra Nooyi at PepsiCo, I think she's just an awesome leader. I think watching Melinda Gates's evolution over the last couple of years has been really inspiring to watch. I think, some of our political leaders, not necessarily just in this country, but Angela Merkel. And I mean, I think she's somebody who didn't take any nonsense from anyone. So I think there are some great examples of female leaders that allow us to see that you can be both strong and human as a leader. And for women, it's not about hiding all of those qualities that we bring. It's about turning them up and ensuring that the people around us understand the value that they bring. Again, I go back to empathy and intuitiveness about people. And those by no means are the only skills and competencies that women bring, but there's some that I think often get seen as demonstrating weakness, and I think they're anything but.
This next question is I borrowed it from somebody. I'm blanking on her name. Brene Brown. Are you a fan of Brene Brown?
I am. I'm a big fan of hers.
I heard this question a while back, and I was just like, "Ooh, I love that question," but I've never used it until now. But what's the best part about being your age?
It's funny. I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and we were talking about being in college. I love being where I am in life right now.
Right.
I am so much less caught up in what other people think. I am so much more confident in my own skin. That doesn't mean always by any means, but I went to a birthday party the other night for a friend, and I was with lots of people that were couples friends when Doug was alive. And I was there for a couple hours, and I finally had that. This does not feel good anymore. This is bringing up too many memories. And normally I would have said, I should sit and wait. And I just said, okay, I've been here long enough, and this doesn't feel good to me anymore, just because it feels painful. Yeah. And I'm going to go sit in the discomfort. And years ago, I never would have been confident in doing that. So I think I'm just much more able to be who I am and be comfortable with that person, and know that not everybody's going to love it. It's not going to be a fit for everybody, but that's who I am, and I'm okay with it. So yeah, just comfort in my skin, I think, is the big one.
Yeah. And it seems like too that learning where to set boundaries for yourself too, and
Absolutely.
keeping yourself at a safe space. That's great.
Yeah.
Last one. What is a life well lived?
A life well lived. So I guess I would say I think everybody's going to have a different definition of what a life well lived is. For me, a life well lived is where I can laugh every single day, where I have meaningful friendships and connections that I tap into just about every day, and where I feel like I am having a positive impact on the people around me. And that can look different every day. Sometimes that's just making a dinner that my kids like. And sometimes it's, whoa, our coaches are out there influencing a whole bunch of 7 and 8-year-olds. And sometimes it's, somebody just had surgery and I'm going to go bring them dinner just because. Or sometimes it's a text because I know a friend of mine is having a rough day. So impact takes all different bigger and smaller forms, but I think those are the big 3. I get to laugh, I stay connected, and I have impact.
Right on, Pam. Thank you so much for being present and sharing all of these questions that I've asked of you to answer. And
it's been so much fun, John. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah,
and I'm wishing you and your wife all the best on the journey ahead. Boy, there's nothing like being a parent.
Yeah, I already feel like so much of a difference already. But thank you for just being open and to share all the things. And I felt like we did mind the gap today.
Yes, I would agree. Well said.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. Please check out the show notes where you'll find the information on how to find out more about the Women's Coaching Alliance at thequakecityportal.com. All the links, as well as some of the information that you heard on this podcast episode, will be posted at thequakecityportal.com. Thank you all for listening. See you next time.